"Don't you dare leave again," said the widow after the cowboy knelt at her door in the rain. The rain had been coming down for 3 days when I finally stopped pretending I was going somewhere. I was on my knees in her mud, not kneeling the way a man does when he chooses it, kneeling the way a man does when his legs give out from under him and the ground comes up to meet him and there's nothing left to negotiate with. The rain was cold, November cold, the kind that gets in under your collar and sits there. My hat had fallen and I didn't reach for it. It lay in the dark mud 2 feet from my hand and the water pooled in the brim and it looked about how I felt. The door opened. Yellow lamplight fell across my shoulders like something almost kind. I heard her say, "Lord in heaven," and then quieter to herself, "Holt." That was my name, Holt Greer. It sounded different in her voice. I hadn't heard it sound like anything in a long time. Let me go back, I'll tell it right. I came through the Cimarron country in the late summer, I told myself I was heading somewhere. Heading is what a man says when he doesn't want to say he's just moving. I was moving. Had been for 4 years. Since the thing with the Aldercott spread went sideways and I lost the cattle contract and then lost the foreman's job and then, if I'm honest, lost the better part of myself somewhere between the Pecos and the Llano. I was good at a specific kind of work. Could read land, read cattle, read weather. Could manage men without raising my voice, which is rarer than it sounds. But that knowledge doesn't travel well once people have made up their minds about you, and the men who decided I was finished had decided it in enough saloons that the decision had gotten ahead of me wherever I rode. 49 years old. Not old, but feeling old the way a fence post feels old, not from years but from standing in wet ground too long. I came through a little bend in the valley called Short Crossing. 24 buildings, a church with half its steeple gone from lightning, a livery, a dry goods, a saloon where 3 men were already drunk at 2 in the afternoon. I meant to buy flour and salt and keep moving. The woman running the dry goods was filling an order for a man in a canvas coat and I waited near the door. She moved efficient, didn't waste a reach. Dark hair with some gray come in at the temples, and she wore it pulled straight back, no fuss. She had a quality I noticed she was present. A lot of women in hard country go a little absent after a few years of it. The eyes get that flat quality, like they're looking at something past what's in front of them. Her eyes were right there in the room on the task. She was in her mid-40s, I'd say, and she'd been through something. You could see that, but it hadn't taken anything from her. She took my coin for the flour and the salt and said, without particular interest, "You passing through?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked at me for a moment, not sizing me up the way people do when they're deciding something about you, more like she was just seeing what was actually there. "We've got a barn that needs the east wall repaired before snow," she said, "if you wanted work." I said I'd think on it. I was 3 miles out of Short Crossing when I turned back. I don't know why I tell it that way, like it was a choice. It wasn't any kind of deliberate thing. I just stopped riding west and started riding east. The horse probably knew more about it than I did. Her name was Nora Cahill. The spread had been her husband's, Owen Cahill, who died of a chest fever 18 months prior. She was running it with one handman, a Mexican named Aurelio who was 60 if he was a day, and who walked with a limp from an old horse roll, but who knew cattle the way some men know scripture, by heart and in the dark. I fixed the barn wall. I was good at it. I knew lumber, knew the way wood moves and what it needs to sit level and true. She came out to look at it the second day and ran her hand along the new planking without saying anything. That was its own kind of compliment. I stayed through September, then October. Aurelio and I didn't talk much for the first few weeks. He watched me the way old men who have seen things watch new things, careful and without commitment. Then one morning he handed me the better of the 2 rope coils without comment, and I understood that meant something, and I took it. The 3 of us worked the fall roundup. It was the first time I'd worked cattle in 2 years that mattered to someone. I want to say that precisely. There's a difference between work that keeps you fed and work that matters to the place and the people doing it with you. This was the second kind. I felt it in a way I couldn't quite account for, like some part of me that had been clenched for a long time was slowly letting go. Nora ran her land without any softness about it. She could look at a calf and tell you its weight within 10 pounds, and she was usually right. She could read weather as well as I could. She didn't explain her decisions. She made them, and you either caught up or you didn't. But in the evenings, when the work was done and Aurelio had gone to his small room off the barn, she'd sometimes set a second coffee cup on the table without asking. That was her way. She didn't ask. She'd put out the second cup and leave it to you whether you wanted to sit. I sat most nights. She didn't talk about Owen much. Once she said he'd been a good man and a fair rancher and that the fever had taken him before she was ready, and then she didn't say anything else about it, and I didn't press. I understood that kind of grief. The kind that isn't dramatic, just present, like a stone in your boot you've learned to walk around. What she talked about was land, water rights. The way the creek ran in a dry year. A section to the north she wanted to prove up on if she could get the capital for the filing. She talked about those things with a directness that I liked. No performance in it, just the actual facts of her actual life. I told her in pieces over those weeks about the Aldercott business. Not all of it. Enough. She listened without telling me what she thought about it until I was done, and then she said, "Sounds like a man who needed someone to blame and you were convenient." Simple as that. I don't know what I expected. Maybe sympathy, or maybe the opposite, some judgment. What she gave me was a clear-eyed read of a situation I'd been inside of too long to see straight. Like when you've been staring at a fence line, so long you can't tell anymore if it's plumb. That was October, first week, and I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long while. Something that sat in my chest and was warm and also made me uneasy because I didn't trust it. But here's the thing about a man who's been dismissed enough times. He starts to do it to himself, saves other people the trouble. Before anyone can look at him and decide he's not worth the investment, he's already packed his kit and found a reason to move on. There's a pride in it, he tells himself. He's choosing to go, not being left. I woke up in the first week of November, and the frost was on the ground, and something in me said, "Go." I still can't entirely explain it. The work was good. The woman was. She was something I didn't have words for then. Aurelio had taken to nodding at me in the mornings, which from him was practically a declaration of brotherhood. I'd eaten better in 2 months than in the 2 years prior. I'd slept in a real bunk, and I'd fixed things that needed fixing, and those things had stayed fixed. And something in me said go. I told myself it was for her sake. That's the lie a man tells himself. I told myself I was a drifter with no real prospects, and she'd be better served with a man who had something to offer. I told myself I was doing her a favor. I packed before dawn, left a note on the work table, 3 sentences, workmanlike, thanking her for the work and wishing the spread well. The kind of note you leave when you're too much a coward to say a thing to a person's face. I got 11 miles. The rain started mid-morning. Not the polite kind of rain. The kind that means it. Cold and driving, and the wind out of the northwest. And within an hour I was soaked through to the skin, and my horse had gone lame with a stone bruise on the left front that I'd been meaning to have Aurelio look at and hadn't, because I'd been planning to leave, and now here I was. I walked the horse, my boots filled with water. The temperature dropped. I kept going west for maybe another mile, and then I stopped. I stood there in the middle of a road that went to nothing particular in either direction, and I looked at the rain coming down, and I thought about what was west of me. Nothing. More nothing. A man with no name worth anything in the next county or the one after that. More saloons where I'd hear the tail end of the story about Holt Greer, how he'd had his chance at the Aldercott spread and blown it. What a shame, always had potential, but... And I turned around. It took 4 hours to walk back. The horse couldn't carry me, so I led her, and the rain didn't let up and the cold got into my hands and my legs, and somewhere around the 3rd hour I stopped feeling my feet and just watched them move. I thought about what I'd say. Couldn't figure it. There's no dignified version of coming back. You left and now you're back and you're soaking wet and your horse is lame. And you left a 3-sentence note like you were a stranger. Not a man who'd sat across a table from her for 60-some evenings and drunk her coffee and told her the most honest things he'd said to anyone in years. The light in the Cahill house was on. I came through the gate, went up the porch steps, got to her door, and my legs went. That's all it was, really. I don't want to make it more. My legs went and I was on my knees and the hat fell and I stayed there, looking at her door, feeling the cold rain on the back of my neck. And then the door opened. She said, "Lord in heaven," then quieter, "Holt." She stood in the doorway looking down at me. She had a shawl pulled around her and her hair was down. She'd been reading, maybe, or just sitting quiet. And the lamp behind her made her look like something from a different world than the one I was kneeling in. I didn't have anything. I said, "I'm sorry about the note." She looked at me for a long moment. Her face didn't do the thing faces do in stories. It didn't flood with relief or anger or tears. She just looked at me with those right there eyes, and something in them was, I don't have a word for it. Not soft, exactly. Present. She was present to it. All of it. The rain and me on my knees and the lame horse standing behind me with her head dropped low. She said, "Don't you dare leave again." Not a question, not a plea, a flat statement. The way she told Aurelio to ride the east fence, or told me what the barn wall needed. This is the fact of it. This is what's true. She came down off the porch, no coat, no boots, right into the mud, and she put her hand on my arm and she pulled. I got up. She was not a small woman and she had the arms of someone who'd worked land for 20 years, and she pulled and I came to my feet, and then I was standing there in front of her, dripping, barely holding it together, and she was looking up at me and her hand was still on my arm. She said, "Come inside." I said, "My horse is lame." She said, "Aurelio will see to her. Come inside." There's things from that night I'll keep. The way she pulled off my wet coat without asking and hung it by the stove and then got my boots and didn't make any fuss about the water on her floor. The coffee she put in front of me. Not the second cup this time. Not the offering. She set it in front of me and sat down across the table like this was simply where I'd be sitting and she'd be sitting, and the question had been settled. Aurelio came in from the barn a while later, saw me, looked at Nora, and she gave him some small nod that I didn't catch the full meaning of. He took a cup from the shelf and poured his own coffee and sat at the end of the table without saying anything. The 3 of us sat in the warmth of the lamp, and the stove and the rain came down outside. After a while Nora said, without looking up from her cup, "I looked at that north section last spring. I think there's a water source that could support it if someone ran the levels properly." I said, "I know how to run levels." She said, "I know you do." That was all of it. That was the whole conversation. But I understood what had been said in it, and I think she knew I did. I want to tell you about the weeks after. Not because they were dramatic, they weren't, but because I need you to understand what came back into me. I'd been running on empty, so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to have something in the tank. I thought I remembered what it felt like to matter somewhere, to have the kind of work where what you know and what you can do is genuinely needed. But I'd remembered it the way you remember a smell, a pale version, not the thing itself. The thing itself was, she asked my opinion on the water rights negotiation with the Delmer family on the south boundary, and she listened when I gave it. Not politely, actually listened, turned it over, pushed back on the part she disagreed with, came around on the part she didn't. She treated what I thought like it was worth the consideration of a serious person. The thing itself was, One afternoon I was resetting the gate post at the south field and Aurelio came to help without being asked, and we worked together in the comfortable silence of two men who'd earned each other's trust. And when we were done he said, in English, he rarely used English with me, "Good post," and went back to his other work. The thing itself was, she brought the second coffee cup out one evening and then set it directly across from her chair and sat down, and she looked at me and said, "You're not passing through anymore." And the way she said it was a question, but it was also a declaration, and I said no, I wasn't, and she nodded once and we both looked out the window at the dark. A man who's been written off by others first, then eventually by himself, he needs a particular kind of proof before he can let himself believe it's real, that he's worth something, that his presence in a place has value. That someone who is good and capable and independent and whole in herself has looked at him clearly, seeing exactly what he is, and chosen to keep him near her. She gave me that proof, not in a rush, not with speeches, piece by piece, the way you shore up a wall, a plank here, a plank there, until the thing can bear weight again. December came in hard. We lost 2 yearlings to a late storm that hit while they were still out on the north pasture. I found one of them and couldn't do anything for it, and I came back to the house with that on me, that particular failure of not being in the right place in time. And she saw my face, and she didn't tell me it wasn't my fault or try to talk me out of it. She just handed me coffee and sat with me while I worked through it. And after a while I could see it more clearly, and I said what I thought we could do differently, and she said she'd been thinking the same. We proved up on the north section in February. The water source was where I'd thought it would be. We ran the levels in the cold, and Aurelio held the rod and I worked the instrument, and Nora stood back and watched, and when the readings came out she said, "I knew it." She was pleased. Not with herself for having had the idea. She was the kind of person who'd already moved past her own satisfaction and was thinking about the next thing. She was pleased with the whole enterprise, the way it had worked out between the three of us. We filed the papers in town, and the clerk, a man named Purcell who'd known Owen Cahill, looked at me with the flat look men like Purcell use when they're deciding what category to put you in. Nora said, without any particular heat, "Holt Greer. He runs operations for Cahill Ranch. Not hired hand. Not foreman. Operations." Purcell looked from her to me and back. She didn't look back at him. She was reading the filing form. I carried that for the rest of the day. I'm not sure why that one thing, out of everything, the work, the evenings, the coffee, the way she'd pulled me to my feet in the rain, why that particular thing landed as hard as it did. Maybe because it was public. Maybe because it was exact. She'd put the words into the world in front of a man who'd be talking about it in an hour, and the words were, "This man matters here." Spring, the creek was running good. The north pasture was proving better than we'd hoped. The grass came in thick and the water source held. One evening in April I was sitting on the porch after supper. The light was going long and gold the way it does in April, and the land looked better than land has any right to look. Nora came out and sat beside me. Not in the other chair. She brought the other chair close and sat beside me. We weren't talking, we were just sitting with the evening. After a while she put her hand over mine on the armrest. Not a grand gesture, just her hand over mine, warm. Her fingers closed once and stayed. I looked at her. She was looking at the pasture. The light was on her face and she looked, I don't know, settled. Like the word settled is what I mean. She looked like a woman who was exactly where she'd decided to be. She turned and looked at me, and her face said everything that her words hadn't needed to. All that winter and those months, it said, "I see what you are. I chose it with my eyes open. I'm not going anywhere and neither are you." I turned my hand over under hers, held it. The creek ran. A meadowlark went off somewhere in the pasture. The light moved slow across the grass. That's where it lives when I think about it. That porch. That April evening. The weight of her hand in mine and the land out in front of us and the work behind us and more of it ahead. Me at 49 years old with nothing I'd been sure of for 4 years, suddenly entirely sure of one thing. She'd knelt down in the mud beside me in a manner of speaking. That's what she'd done when she came down off that porch in November and put her hand on my arm and told me to come inside. She didn't have to do that. She was fine without me. She'd been running the place. She had Aurelio. She had her own mind and her own competence, and she didn't need saving from anything. She chose to come down into the mud anyway. She chose it because she'd looked at me the way she looked at things right there, in the room, present, and she decided I was worth the reach. When a good woman who doesn't need you decides she wants you, that's a different thing. That's not charity. That's a verdict, and it means something. I spent 4 years convinced the verdict on me was in. Her hand in mine on that porch in April, that was the real verdict. I think about short crossing, how I was going to buy flour and salt and keep moving, how she set the second coffee cup on the table the first evening without asking and let it sit there for me to take or leave. I think about the rain, the 11 miles west in the cold and the 4 hours back through it. How long that road was, and how I kept going anyway. I think about her coming down off the porch in November. No coat, no boots, right into the mud. She said, "Don't you dare leave again." I haven't. The north pasture's full of good cattle now. Aurelio walks with less of a limp in the warm months. Some days the three of us work the place, and there's a rightness to it that I don't know how to say better than that. Right. Like a post set true in solid ground. Like a wall that's plumb and will stay plumb. There's a meadowlark that comes back every spring and sets up in the same corner of the north fence. Nora says it's the same bird. I don't know if that's true, but I like that she believes it. I like most of what she believes, and the things I don't, we've talked over at the table with the lamp between us and the coffee going cold. She's asleep right now. I came out early to check the creek. It always runs a little different after the snow melt, and the morning's coming in slow and silver and the land is quiet. I stood at the creek a while, listening to it. Then I came back to the porch and sat down to wait for the house to wake up. It's enough. It is more than enough. It is, I'll just say it, it is everything. This ordinary morning on this ordinary porch with this patch of land, and this one good woman inside who is going to come through that door in a while with her hair down, and her eyes right there in the room. The creek's running good. I'm not going anywhere.